Okay. We'll get back on record. This is the continuation of when we were hearing case number 24881 regarding Northwind Midstream Partners for approval of an additional redundant acid gas injection well and to amend order number R20913 as amended and SWD 2622 to authorize an increased shared maximum daily injection rate in Lee County, New Mexico. Mr. Rankin, we turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. May it please the Commission. We have one witness today to present the testimony on the request for approval of this additional redundant AGI in the Devonian. So at this time, unless the Commission has any questions of me, I would ask that Mr. David White take the stand and so we can present our case on request for approval.
Sure. Mr. White, if you'll come have a seat here. And when you take a seat, if you'll just make sure that the microphone is on, it'll be the little person with a half circle right around them. There you go. And Mr. Chandler, will you swear in the witness for us, please?
Sure. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name for the record.
David Allen White.
Good afternoon, Mr. White. Will you please let us know by whom you're employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by GeoLex Incorporated, and I'm the vice president.
And have you previously testified before the Commission?
I have, yes.
And have you been recognized as an expert in geology, hydrogeology, seismic interpretation, and fault slip modeling, and acid gas injection well permitting and operations?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the application that's filed in this case?
Yes, I am.
Did you also prepare or oversee the preparation of the C-108 that was submitted as part of this application, in fact, Exhibit A?
Yes, I did.
And do your duties include project management? Well, I'll skip over all that. Now, let me, since we're no longer contesting it, I think that there's no objection. Well, let me skip forward here. Rather than reviewing your background and testimony, background and your history of education and experience, I'm just going to ask you, have you conducted a study of the geology and hydrogeology of the lands in the area of the application?
Yes, I have.
And have you conducted analysis and modeled the potential plume that would result from injection of the proposed treated acid gas?
Yes, I have.
And have you also prepared a model analyzing the fault slip probability based on the proposed injection?
Yes, I have.
And were exhibits A and B that were submitted as part of the hearing packet prepared by you or compiled under your direction and supervision?
Yes.
Any corrections or changes at this time to exhibits A or B?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I would retender Mr. White as an expert witness in geology, hydrogeology, seismic interpretation, and fault slip modeling and acid gas injection and well permitting and operation.
Okay, Mr. Tremaine.
No objection.
Okay, he shall be entered.
All right. Mr. Chair, at this time, I'll share my screen. And Mr. White, let me know when you can see the image before you. This is a copy of the application that was, or exhibit packet that was filed as part of this case. On the table of contents, you'll see that there's the application with the C-108. Exhibit A to the application was the C-108. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And is all the information required for approval of the proposed Titan AGI number 4 included in the application and in the C-108?
Yes, it is.
And the application for hearing was filed back on September 17th, 2024, correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Rankin, I'm just going to stop you one
Yep.
second. Can we just move your microphone a little closer to you, just to make sure that the court reporters can hear? Thank you.
And have you prepared a slide presentation reviewing the details of the C-108 and the application filed with the commission and the basis for approval?
Yes, I have.
And that's marked as Exhibit B, is that correct?
Yes.
Here's the table of contents. Let's go ahead and I'll skip down to your overview of the application. And if you would just give us an overview of what's being requested in this application by Northwind.
Yeah, so as been previously kind of mentioned, Northwind is seeking approval of an additional acid gas injection well at their Titan treatment facility that will serve both the purposes of improving the redundancy in their processes at that facility, as well as allow for an incremental increase or an increase in the total allowable injection volume shared between those wells. Specifically, Northwind is requesting approval up to 28.8 million standard cubic feet per day in preparation for their anticipated acid gas disposal needs of the area. As you had previously mentioned, the Form C-108 does include all relevant sections and supporting materials necessary to substantiate that request and to allow for approval of that application. And as many of you are likely aware, these types of wells are really becoming the preferred method for midstream operators in terms of sour gas handling. And the Northwind facility itself, the Titan treatment facility, has been designed such that it does rely and incorporate those preferred methods.
So in order to speed this along, Mr. White, I'm not going to ask you questions directly. You've prepared this presentation. And if it's okay with the commission and Mr. Tremaine, I'm just going to ask you to go ahead and review each slide and go through the supporting materials that support approval in this case. And I may interject here or there for clarification or to make sure something is clear for the commission. But with that, I'll just go ahead and ask you to walk through your slides, and then I may interject here and there until you're complete. Okay.
Sure. So in this first slide, as some of you may be aware, the history and the planning for acid gas injection wells at this facility has a bit of a history. When the original application and project development began in 2018. So I think it's a good idea, and what I wanted to show in this map is give everyone kind of a general layout of what the facility looks like in terms of its well placement. Proposed and active. The facility itself is located approximately 7.5 miles southwest of the city of Jal, New Mexico, specifically in section 21 of Township 26 South, Range 36 East. The well, as you can see, and unfortunately the ArcGIS base map layers do not show the absolute current configuration of the surface facility. It's showing only the facility as it was prior or around the time of Northwind's acquisition of it. So currently the surface layout and disturbance does extend to the south, to the lease road that's kind of slightly inclined northeast, and to the north of that facility across that east-west pipeline disturbance that you see there. But on the disturbance of the property that's shown here, the red injection well symbol was the originally permitted Salt Creek AGI #1 location, permitted back in 2019. That well was ultimately plugged and abandoned due to some downhole difficulties. And as part of the history of it, we came back seeking the approval to relocate and redesign that well to accommodate for those downhole difficulties. The new location is shown by the blue injection well symbol to the southeast, labeled as Salt Creek AGI #3. Now, that change in the numeric sequence is ultimately because at the time that relocation request was being made, application for Salt Creek AGI #2, the commission's required redundant deep AGI well had already been submitted. So that numeric sequence is a little bit abnormal because of that. So to the north of that pipeline track, the black injection well shown is Salt Creek AGI #2, which was approved administratively as the commission had remanded it back to the division for decision, and subsequently amended from a vertical injection well to a deviated injection well. So that well was drilled and recently completed from the surface location shown to a bottom hole location to the southeast. The final marker on that map shows the proposed Titan AGI number 4, which is the well relating to the matter we're discussing today. So as I briefly mentioned, AGI wells in general, and what we'll talk about for a couple slides here is just the key elements of Northwind's application and some of the benefits of AGI wells. As I mentioned, AGI wells have become a preferred sour gas handling method for these types of facilities, not only because it simplifies treatment processes a bit and reduces potential downtime associated with alternative sulfur control measures, but it has a strong environmental benefit that, along with handling the dangerous hydrogen sulfide, it also results in the permanent sequestration of significant amounts of CO2. With respect to Northwind's application, our review of the project area has shown that oil and gas wells, water wells, and surface waters in the area of the proposed AGI number 4 are all protected via design considerations for the proposed well, which includes adequate surface casing installation to protect groundwater sources, as well as multiple additional strings that provide physical barriers between the injection string and adjacent geologic strata. Throughout the long history of the project, the access to data and the depth of our geologic investigation has also continued, and as a result of that, our geologic analysis, which most recently incorporates utilization of 3D seismic data, has really allowed for a good delineation and good characterization of the injection reservoir in this zone. Furthermore, fault slip probability modeling based on those geologic analyses shows that, as proposed and the volumes proposed in operating conditions, the series of wells in the Devonian do not produce any elevated risk for injection-induced seismic events. With respect to reservoir modeling and characterization of the reservoir, as I mentioned, this project does have a bit of a long history, and the product of reservoir modeling and simulation that you're seeing today and that has been provided in the C108 application and the exhibits is really a refined version that has begun initially with well control in 2019 and 2020 to incorporating 3D seismic data and derivative analyses of those data to really generate a reservoir characterization model and plume forecasts that we think are adequately supportive of Northwind's operations and adequately prepares Northwind to understand the impacts of their plume and their injection activities. In general, the C108 application includes all relevant subsections for approval. As is required of these facilities and these types of operations, Northwind does have an existing hydrogen sulfide contingency plan, which upon approval of this well and construction of this well will of course be incorporated and submitted to NMED and relevant parties to ensure that all that plan reflects all of the proposed operations and as approved conditions. All interested parties requiring notification have been provided copies of Northwind's application and have received notice. And as of today, no parties are intervening on the matter. And so just to kind of reiterate a little bit of the history, we'll talk mostly about the kind of flow chart shown on the right here, but just to make sure everyone has some perspective about the evolution of this project and the current status of the facility. The original application for a acid gas injection well at this facility was submitted in 2019. With the approval of that application and the first order being issued in January of 2020. Now, that owing to the sour gas disposal needs of that facility, that drilling activities for that well did not occur until Q4 of 2022, when those sour gas disposal volumes became required at that facility. So the drilling of that well ultimately began at the end of 2022. When drilling that well, as I mentioned, there were some downhole issues that prevented completion of that well. And so Salt Creek, Northwind's predecessor operator prior to Northwind's acquisition, sought amendment to relocate and redesign that well to address those issues. And the NMOCC issued Order 20913F approving that redesign in June of 2023. After that, Northwind did acquire the facility and proceeded to drill the Salt Creek AGI number 3 in Q4 of 2023, after which the redundant Salt Creek AGI number 2 was authorized via the administrative process. And I'm sorry, the associated order on this is incorrect. Rather than being SWD 2622, it should be SWD 2580, which was issued to Northwind. However, they did not drill the well based on that order. That order was planned for a vertical well at that time. However, upon acquisition of 3D seismic data and additional geologic analysis, it was determined that a deviated well to a more higher quality interval of Siluro-Devonian injection zone would be more preferable. So there was an amendment application submitted requesting that change of plans, which was ultimately approved in August of 2024. And Salt Creek AGI number 2 was drilled and most recently completed in early 2025. And I recognize that's a very complicated history, so feel free to ask any questions if anything doesn't make sense. So here we take, in this slide, we're taking a look at the general project area, both from a more regional perspective, where in the map shown to the left, you see the city of Jal to the northeast, and the position of the general position of the proposed Titan AGI number 4 and the Salt Creek facility in the southwest of Jal, New Mexico. And again, in the panel to the right, we just see, again, the kind of arrangement of AGI wells at the facility currently. In accordance with the normal C108 development processes for determining a maximum allowable operating pressure, this slide includes the calculations and the assumptions we made in determining the requested maximum allowable operating pressure, which for acid gas wells utilizes an NMOCD approved method in which the specific gravity or average density of the acid gas is utilized to determine and calculate the maximum allowable operating pressure. Of course, can you hold there one second? Of course, with, as is stipulated by, most orders that are issued with respect to AGI wells and SWD wells, the intent will be that once the well is constructed, step rate injection testing will be completed to confirm the adequacy of that requested allowable operating pressure. So in this slide, we're summarizing a little bit of the general design of the acid gas injection well system and the proposed operations. As in accordance with Northwind's current gas inlet compositions, the Titan AGI number 4 is anticipated to inject a mixed acid gas stream predominantly containing carbon dioxide, H2S, and trace amounts of nitrogen and hydrocarbons. The tag is transmitted from the amine treatment system at low pressure. And for this description, we can begin looking at the kind of schematic diagram on the right there. But tag is transmitted from the amine system to a compression process unit where it is through successive stages of compression, compressed and dehydrated through interstage cooling, and then transmitted to each of the AGI wells via high pressure NACE compliant lines. In the well profile shown to the right, we do have some annotations of key design standards that are characteristic of all of Northwind's well and most AGI wells currently, specifically in that the AGI wells are constructed with not only surface safety valves that are automated and tied into plant control systems, but as well downhole subsurface safety valves that allow for integrated control through the plant control systems. The AGI wells in general are designed to be robust in potentially corrosive conditions where they incorporate corrosion-resistant alloy materials constructed with acid-resistant cements, and ultimately are designed such that they are suitable for the dry acid gas injection conditions proposed. In addition, Northwind's wells and many AGI wells incorporate continuous bottom hole monitoring of pressure and temperature, which are important to understanding reservoir pressure evolution, informing geologic characterization models and injection simulations. And these have been incorporated in all of Northwind's AGI wells. In this slide, we show the proposed design of the Titan AGI number 4, which is very consistent with AGI wells constructed in this area of New Mexico, and in accordance with the needs of the specific geology that you encounter in this area. Just kind of at a high level summarizing that, you can see from the diagram that 5 casing strings are proposed for the design of this well, the first of which includes surface casing down to a depth of approximately 2,100 feet, with the ultimate purpose of isolating and protecting groundwater resources in the area. Secondly, the first intermediate casing would be proposed to be installed down to an approximate depth of 3,660 feet, ultimately isolating intervals which may contain salts and hydrites in this particular part of the basin that overlie the Capitan Reef, which is expected in this area. The second intermediate casing proposed would be set at a depth of 5,590 feet, utilizing DV tools to ensure adequate cementation, isolating the Capitan, which in this area has been observed as a potential lost circulation zone. Following the second intermediate, the third intermediate casing interval would be proposed to be drilled down to approximately 11,820 feet, ultimately isolating an interval of potentially lower pressure across the Delaware Mountain Group and Bone Springs interval. Because we do have an existing acid gas injection well that injects into the shallow Delaware Mountain Group. Along this interval, we would incorporate and utilize acid-resistant cements to make sure that this well is protected from any formation fluids containing acid gas that might be detrimental to the integrity of Titan AGI number 4. The production casing would be set at approximately 17,570 feet, ultimately isolating the high pressure gas intervals of geologic formations such as the Strana Tocamaro. And within this string, we would utilize corrosion resistant alloy and cements again in the overlying caprock intervals to ultimately protect downhole AGI well components. The plan is that all strings will be cemented to the surface, and those cement operations will be verified via wireline cement bond logging. In terms of data acquisition, well logging and reservoir testing and monitoring for this well, while drilling activities are ongoing, mud logging is, we would propose to commence below the 24-inch surface casing and be continued throughout the total depth of the well. In terms of wireline geophysical logs, our intent is to collect, normal routine gamma density, resistivity, neutron porosity, and sonic tools. And for the purposes of understanding potential fracture gradients and fracture pressures, we would also incorporate dipole sonic logs, which have been collected for the offsetting Salt Creek AGI number 2 well, but would continue to collect those data in the Titan AGI number 4. In addition to this, with respect to the caprock, the primary and secondary caprock intervals, as well as the injection zone, those intervals would be imaged using full bore formation microimaging tools or similar tools based on the drilling fluids program for that particular interval. As is normal with AGI wells, we would also collect rotary sidewall cores for analysis in the caprock intervals, secondary caprock intervals, and as well as the injection zone proper. In addition to the logging activities, the well would also be injection tested via step rate injection test and pressure fall off test to inform model simulations, get a better understanding of the injectivity potential for these wells or this well, and to ultimately confirm any preliminary analyses with respect to fracture pressures and things like that. Once completed, drilling the well will be outfitted with all of its permanent downhole pressure and temperature sensors, corrosion-resistant alloy tubulars, and subsurface safety valves and other AGI equipment. Now, in this slide, we overview the general geology of the project area. In the map shown to the left, we have a map probably seen many times around this in this setting, with the proposed AGI well denoted as the red square in southeastern New Mexico. As we can see from this map, the proposed well location is in the eastern margin of the Delaware Basin, where surface sediments are generally characterized by aeolian and alluvial units with local exposures of red beds. Approximately 11,000 feet of Permian strata, which in places contain producing intervals, overlie the lower Paleozoic strata, which are intervals of gas, the Strana Tocamaro Pennsylvanian section being gas-bearing intervals and gas-producing intervals. Overlying the proposed injection interval, the Woodford Shale, a well-known and well-demonstrated confining unit in this area, is greater than 370 feet thick and makes up the primary confining strata for this injection well. In addition to this, the overlying Mississippian carbonates provide secondary caprock intervals and shales of the Barnett that in this area are expected to be about 800 feet of secondary confining strata. As we'll talk a little bit later, we do have access to 3D seismic survey data with respect to this project location, which has allowed us to get a good characterization of the geology and identify faults in the area such that they can adequately be evaluated with respect to induced seismicity risk. In this slide, we're just putting into perspective the project location with respect to the producing intervals in the area and the geologic strata that comprise the section. The highlighted section of this chart indicates or shows the Delaware Basin units, with red stars showing commonly producing intervals, whether that's oil or natural gas. In this particular area, we are towards the Delaware Basin margin. So depending on where you're at, you may see some other productive intervals, which would be listed in the Central Basin Platform section, inclusive of things like the Tansel, Yates, Seven Rivers, depending on where you're at in the project area. Again, with respect to what geology we expect to encounter, as I mentioned, the Salt Creek AGI #2 well, which is a very similar design and deviates towards the southeast, was just recently completed. Not in operation, but was recently completed. And so that has been able to give us a good sense of where and what formations we're going to see drilling Titan AGI #4. So as you can see in the tabulated summary there, the geologic formations we expect and the current prognosis for measured depths that we find those formation tops. In this slide, we can see in the map shown to the right a structure contour map, which was derived from the seismic data that were acquired and reflect the top of the Siluro-Devonian, so the top of the proposed injection zone. As we can see from this structure contour map, where cooler colors reflect increased depth to the top and warmer colors would reflect shallower depths to the top, that in general the top of the Siluro-Devonian section is dipping towards the southwest. In the kind of the center of the map where those well locations are annotated, we see the two locations of Salt Creek AGI #2, the existing well, as well as the proposed Titan AGI #4, existing down dip of a structural high to the approximate northeast. In this slide, we're taking a look at a cross-section of wells across that project area, which shows a couple things, a couple key things. The brown shaded interval that is shown in those wells from A to A prime show the continuity of the Woodford Shale across the project area. In addition to this, the highlighted sections that underlie that brown shaded area show intervals of the Siluro-Devonian, the proposed injection zone, which we identify porosity development within those zones. And as I mentioned briefly, the thickness of the Woodford Shale at the Titan AGI #4 location is significant. In the offset well, we see it as approximately 370 feet thick and overlain by tight carbonates and shales of the Barnett and Osage formation.
Next one. Next
Yeah,
slide.
yeah,
Sorry.
that works. And so, with this slide, what I wanted to provide the commission with is, part of this was not included in the original C-108 application, as it reflects well logs that were collected from the recently completed Salt Creek AGI number 2. And so these are in these slides. And what I wanted to highlight is the level of porosity development that we are seeing in this well. We ultimately made requests prior to deviate the well based on concerns that a current vertical well would not access quality reservoir, and ultimately I think that came down to be a good decision. And for comparison, in the upper Devonian section, we see porosity development that's very similar to analog AGI wells in this area. However, in the Fusselman section, we do see porosity development being substantially better than we've seen in some other analog wells. And so ultimately, we just wanted to highlight that the methodology used to determine a bottom hole location for AGI number 2 was a similar methodology for Titan AGI number 4. And so we hope that methodology will produce a similarly productive well. As part of the supporting material requirements for the C-108 application, we've also looked at groundwater conditions in the area and reviewed the well's area of review for existing groundwater wells, points of diversion. And just to be clear, when I'm referring to the area of review for this project, because we are proposing a deviated well, we've kind of modified the area of review to go beyond 1 mile. So rather than just being a 1 mile radius, it is the composite shape of a 1 mile radius at the surface hole location, a 1 mile radius at the bottom hole location, and a 1 mile buffer along the deviated well path. So it actually is a larger area of review than just a standard 1 mile. In this modified area of review, we find 14 water wells, the nearest of which being just over a half mile from the Titan AGI number 4 locations. And in reviewing those well records, all of these wells are shallow, not extending beyond 1,000 feet in total depth. And ultimately, the design of the Titan AGI number 4 considers those wells in order to provide adequate casing protection and cementing protection. As I mentioned in a previous slide, surface casing for this well will extend down beyond 2,000 feet to ultimately isolate those intervals of potential groundwater resources. In characterizing oil and gas activities or injection activities within the area of review, our review of records and records analysis shows that there are 83 wells within the total area of review, which is the 1 mile buffer area, 22 of which are active, with 32 permitted locations and 29 plugged wells. Reviewing the records for those wells, many of them are shallow wells, which would have total depths significantly overlying the proposed interval of injection, commonly producing or previously producing from the Tansel, Yates, Seven Rivers, and with some newer wells producing from the Bone Springs and Wolfcamp formations. Again, overlying the targets that overlie the proposed injection zone by thousands of feet. In the 1 mile area of review, there is one well that was drilled and penetrated the Siluro-Devonian proposed injection zone, that being the South Lee Federal number 1. And it is shown in the northwestern extent of that area of review circular area, and it is 23197. The well was drilled to a total depth within the injection zone, but was ultimately found to be not productive and was isolated with cast iron bridge plugs and cement plugs and recompleted shallow, and then ultimately fully plugged back to the surface and in 2015. So in confirming a location to be suitable for acid gas injection, there's really some major components that we're looking to satisfy with any particular location. And I think for this location and our understanding of the subsurface, the Titan AGI number 4 project does meet all of the requirements, which include very critical characteristics such as geologic seals that permanently contain the injected fluid, that pose no risk to fresh groundwater or groundwater resources. They don't impact or the project area doesn't have significant history of production. And the reservoir both is confined laterally, but also is characterized by porosity and permeability attributes laterally. And then ultimately identifying reservoir suitable for your proposed operations with respect to capacity and with respect to formation fluid chemistry.
Mr. White, does the C1, you talk about fresh water and geologic seals, does the C108 also contain an affirmative statement by you that you've prepared confirming that there are no communication between the injection zone and any known sources of drinking water?
Yes, it does.
Just to point out for the commission, that's on PDF page 40 of the exhibit packet. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. I know the division cares to make sure you've got the signed statement confirming that there are no communication pathways. I'll return you back to where you were. I believe it was you're going to get into your fault slip analysis. Is that right?
Yeah. So as we mentioned at the beginning of my testimony, or in accordance with Mr. Rankin's introduction to the testimony, in evaluating this location in the proposed well, we did evaluate the potential for fault slip or injection-induced seismic events, which I'm sure most are aware of is a point of concern in many areas of the world right now. Ultimately, for our analysis, the major components included review and interpretation of seismic survey data to make sure we have a clear understanding as best we can of the subsurface features in the area of our proposed well. Additionally, that modeling and that assessment included modeling of injection well scenarios, in this case, a 5-well injection scenario in which acid gas injection is simulated and in a model simulation capable of considering fault structures in the area and calculating or projecting an associated risk with that scenario. Specifically for this work, as most are probably familiar with, we utilize the Stanford Center for Induced and Triggered Seismicity's fault slip potential model. And in this slide, we show kind of the general results of our analysis of seismic data, where we have plotted generally the faults that we see in the area of the proposed well. These faults were utilized for the fault slip probability simulations. And as you can see, in order to express those faults in the model. Some of those were broken up into fault segments in order to accurately characterize their nonlinear expression. In general, looking at these, we see 13 faults in the area, which we've subdivided for modeling purposes into 23 fault segments. Most of these, you see a couple different populations of either north-south to east-west or east-west trending faults. In general, these faults, in our analysis of seismic survey data, the offset along these faults or the fault throw does not exceed from what we've seen, the thickness of the Woodford Shale. So we don't see any evidence that the primary confining layer of the Woodford Shale would be offset in any way that compromises its containment. Now, for this work, like I mentioned, we included 5 injection wells in the fault slip probability simulations. This particular part of southeastern New Mexico is not really inundated with disposal activities at the moment. In the map shown, you see the 2 Northwind AGI wells at the facility, Titan AGI 4 and the Salt Creek AGI number 2, as well as north of the facility. There are 2 existing AGI wells about 6 miles north, the Independence AGI wells. Those were included in the slip probability assessment. And to the northeast of the facility, 1 saltwater disposal well, the Kimberly SWD well. So with modeling injection and the evaluating the risk for induced seismicity, this particular Stanford model requires input parameters and some assumptions with respect to fault orientations, local stress conditions, in order to evaluate and determine pressures required to induce slip in this simulation. And so the table here shows the modeling assumptions or the stress conditions that were assumed for these simulations. And in this slide, we show the model's initial kind of assessment of what pressures are required to induce slip. So we see with a range of fault orientations, we see that the model predicts that of these 24 fault segments, the anticipated pore pressure increase to induce slip ranging between approximately 1,080 to 6,930 psi. In this area of the world, maximum horizontal stress is oriented approximately north 75 east. And that's in accordance with stress characterization of folks like Lunsny and Zobak, and utilizing their state of stress maps. With respect to this project area, there is some fault segments that we identify as having the increased risk of slip, which are shown or annotated here as fault segments 1, 2, 9, 10, and 21, which are those that are identified as having less than 1,500 psi to induce slip. In this slide, we summarize the injection wells that are included in this simulation, the 5 injection wells, 2 of which being AGI wells operated and proposed by Northwind, as well as the reservoir barrel equivalent volumes that the simulation assumes, as well as the total duration of the simulation period. So the objective with this modeling and simulation is to consider at least the proposed AGI wells for a period of 30 years. However, often there are wells that have been operating from before that time. And so for those wells, the simulation period would have been extended to history match and ultimately include prior contributions of those wells. So you'll see some like the Kimberly SWD where the simulation begins in 2019. In accordance with the limitations of the Stanford model, one conservative approach we take with these simulations is that that model can only account for one fluid type at a time. So for all of these wells, we do assume the fluid characteristics of produced water rather than acid gas, which provides us a little bit more conservative estimates with respect to resultant pressure increase as the water is greater density and greater viscosity than what would be seen in a pure acid gas injection alone. Here we see the hydrologic results of that simulation, where in panel A, we see a kind of generalized map that shows from cooler to warmer colors, the model's prediction for pore pressure increase in association with that injection scenario. So this would be the point 30 years or 30 plus years, depending on what the level of history match was, and the anticipated pore pressure increase after the full simulation. So as you can see around the AGI wells, which, both the Northwind's proposed and existing AGI wells, as well as the offsetting AGI wells to the north, the ultimate pressure impacts are less than a higher volume SWD, ultimately owing to the smaller volumes that actually are placed in the reservoir in association with acid gas wells. With the hydrologic simulation results, the model also then calculates utilizing a range of uncertainty and various model parameters such as fault orientation or density of fluids. It calculates utilizing a Monte Carlo simulation, the ultimate fault slip probability associated with this. So in panel A to the left, we see a cross plot of time versus fault slip potential. And were there any potential for fault slip in this injection scenario, you would see a series of trend lines that go up or move with time. However, for each fault segment. However, owing to the minimal amount of injection that is actually going on in this area and the geomechanical risk for slip, all fault segments within this simulation are shown to be at 0 probability for slip. In the panel to the right, we show a similar results where the fault slip probability is graphically displayed in association with the various AGI or the injection wells in the project area. Again, all of those fault segments colored green as the model predicts 0 probability. As I mentioned before, a critical point of identifying a suitable location for acid gas injection well is confirmation that your confining strata are adequate for containing injected acid gas. And as I mentioned, in terms of subsurface review and fault identification, we don't see any offset in faults that allow for the lateral continuity of the Woodford Shale to be offset. But we also want to take that a step further and look at pressure conditions as best we can in the Siluro-Devonian versus overlying strata. And so what we commonly do is look at drilling fluid records and confirm that the pressure conditions we expect to anticipate are such that injected gas will remain in the reservoir. Could you move to the next slide? So this will make a little bit more sense now. So in the interval overlying the proposed injection zone, we see gas-containing units of the Strawn Atocamaro, which have been studied, and an interval of overpressure has been identified in the eastern Delaware Basin across this interval. And so the map shown in this slide is from Rittenhouse et al., who evaluated, as you can see there, 23,000 mud weight records and greater than 4,000 drill stem tests to kind of characterize this interval of overpressure. And so this pore pressure increase has been identified, beginning in the Bone Springs down through the Woodford Shale. And commonly within the proposed injection zone, we see relatively underpressured conditions. So what we want to ultimately confirm is that this same circumstance will be present in our project area. Because ultimately, if you have this pressure isolation, then you can assume you're not going to be losing acid gas out of the reservoir. And so this is just another diagram that shows the results of Rittenhouse's work, where in the tracks to the right, this diagram is showing essentially stratigraphy and log data from the Delaware down through the Bone Springs, Wolf Camp, all the way down to the injection zone, and then the Siluro Devonian. And when you look at the tracks to the right, you see the two red traces where within the Bone Springs, Rittenhouse's compilation of data shows increases in pore pressure all the way down through the Woodford, and then returning to normally pressured conditions below that. And so now we ultimately want to kind of take that high level interpretation of the Eastern Delaware Basin and see if local drilling fluid records are supportive of that. Because ultimately we want to be prepared to understand if while drilling the well, we need to deal with high pressure gas from those intervals, construct the well in such a way that those intervals can be isolated, and understand what conditions we're going to encounter. And so what we see in the map shown to the right here is drilling fluid records, scout tickets, and things like that for wells in the area. Ultimately, we see in those intervals anticipated to contain higher pressures. We see drilling mud densities that were utilized ranging from just under 12 pounds per gallon to up to 15 pounds per gallon in this project area. That corresponds to an average density of 13.4. And those drilling fluid records also do indicate and confirm once moving into the Siluro Devonian, we see more normally pressured depth intervals. And this is all consistent with what was observed in the recent drilling of Salt Creek AGI number 2. So in reviewing these data and kind of premised on the work of more regional data and identification of an overpressured Eastern Delaware Basin, we don't expect that and confirming that those overpressured conditions are present within the project area, we don't expect that there's going to be any risk for vertical migration or any pressure drive out of the intended reservoir. This is supported by the drilling fluid characteristics that we see in records, supported by our experiences drilling the Salt Creek AGI number 2, and ultimately, we think maintaining this pressure differential in this project area will help to contain fluids in the zone. And that's really only complementing the fact that we have physical, competent Woodford shale caprock laterally extensive across the area. Now, in these next few slides, we'll talk, I'm guessing, pretty extensively about the reservoir characterization and injection simulations that were completed to support this application. As AGI well applications have evolved, so has the kind of assessments and evaluations that are utilized to forecast where these plumes are going and what the resultant impacts to the subsurface are going to be. As I mentioned previously, this particular project has had a good amount of history, and what we will look at today are kind of the most recent evolution and refinement of those plume estimates. Following the original AGI #1 well, all of the plume forecasts have been completed utilizing Schlumberger's Petrel and Eclipse platforms for geologic characterization modeling and injection simulation, respectively. However, they have been refined over time in that and rebuilt completely to incorporate things like the additional data provided by 3D seismic survey. And so in this slide, the figure to the right shows just a three-dimensional render of the existing geologic characterization model, which, as I mentioned, was, really leverages the recent acquisition of 3D seismic survey data. Having those data available to us recently, we were able to characterize the reservoir utilizing seismic inversion analysis methods, ultimately where you're able to transform seismic data to rock properties, a method that's been very well demonstrated and successful for identifying quality reservoirs within carbonate injection zones. These data were incorporated into this model, so porosity attributes within the model are derived from those inversion data. In evaluating the potential impacts to the project area, we did conduct multiple simulations under conditions in which, faults were transmissive to fluids, faults were non-transmissive to fluids, to ultimately make sure all of the stones were turned over and ensure we understood where the potential directions that this plume could go. Comprising the geologic characterization model that was shown in the previous slide, the model was built out to generally be subdivided into 8 zones, generally based on the porosity and permeability characteristics observed. However, the model itself does contain 151 kind of sliced horizontal layers that are all informed through the seismic impedance data. The model in total is almost 3.4 million cells with dimensions of approximately 165 by 165 by 10 feet. The table to the right shows kind of the summary of characteristics of those zones, their numeric sequence, their thickness, and then the average porosity and permeability within those zones. The total model itself has an average permeability or an average porosity of 2.1% and average permeability of 5.1 millidarcies. And ultimately, these are based on both published literature with respect to carbonate and dolomite permeabilities, available test data, as well as sidewall core data and data, history match data from other analog AGI wells. In this slide, we're communicating and summarizing what the distribution of that porosity and permeability looks like within the model. These two charts, panels A and B, are essentially bar charts showing a range of porosity and the percentage of cells within the model that see those porosity attributes. The same thing with permeability shown in panel B to the right. We see the permeability range, the permeability values within the model, and the percentage of cells that within the model that attribute those permeability values. And just to summarize, that was, can you go back up one more, Adam, or Mr. Rankin? Up one more slide. That, just to reiterate, that would be 2.1% average porosity in the model. So as I summarized when in the earlier portions of the slide presentation, in accordance with Northwind's anticipated operating conditions, this simulation does consider a mixed acid gas stream of approximately 80% CO2 and 20% H2S. And the simulation was completed for 30 years of Northwind activities for those wells. I'm sorry, excuse me. The model leverages ultimately has to be a little bit informed by with respect to acid gas density and fluid characteristics, and for determining those for this mixed acid gas stream and anticipated reservoir conditions, we utilize the NIST RefProp software, which, if you've seen other acid gas injection applications, would be comparable or similar software to something like Aquilibrium. For all of our simulations, wells were operated at the maximum allowable or the maximum proposed daily injection volume, ultimately to make sure we have a most conservative estimate of the plume footprint, such that we can identify all wells that may be in its path or potentially impacted by it. This reservoir, or this simulation, also assumes the reservoir is fully saturated with brine. It doesn't consider any prior production history in accordance with the records and activities in this area. And as I mentioned earlier, we do present multiple case simulations in which faults are both transmissive or alternatively non-transmissive to fluid, ultimately with the aims of identifying the maximum area that could be impacted. And this slide just summarizes those case studies where we have Titan AGI number 4 and Salt Creek AGI number 2, splitting the proposed volume with 14.4 million standard cubic feet per day being injected into each well, and under fault flow conditions of both transmissive and non-transmissive. And for perspective, the 28.8 million standard cubic feet, it may be a little bit difficult to envision exactly what that is. So with respect to that, under reservoir conditions, that would typically equate to about 13,760 barrels per day. So in the next two slides, we show the results of those case simulations. And you'll have to forgive me, but I believe that panel B on this slide is switched with the panel B that should be on the next slide. But we can talk about that as we work through it. But in the panel shown to the left, we show a contour map, which is ultimately displaying the resultant gas saturation that we anticipate at the end of the 30-year injection scenario. So under transmissive fault conditions, the outermost contour line would reflect the total footprint of the injection plume. And so And this is specifically showing concentration for the zone, the vertical interval of injection that has the greatest aerial footprint. So these contours and concentrations of gas that we are showing do not necessarily mean that, that's the concentration from top to bottom. It's just for this particular zone, which has the greatest aerial extent. So with respect to the aerial footprint across the project area, we see in this simulation, we see gas extending approximately 1.8 miles from the Titan facility. In the panel to the right, we are showing a cross-sectional view of the geologic model, where again, colors from warm to cool correspond to higher to lower resultant gas saturations. So towards looking at either map, the map to the left or the cross section to the right, we see the highest concentrations of acid gas, of course, being towards the point of injection at the well bores and becoming more diffuse with respect to saturation as we move outwards towards the plume. Here we see the results from the case 2 simulation, in which faults are considered to be non-transmissive to flow. So ultimately, in the immediate project area, the Salt Creek wells are not bounded in close proximity by any faults that we've seen. And so we don't really see too much restriction or fault control on the ultimate expression of the plume. We do see a little bit of the fault impact to the north with the kind of little notch shown in the contour map where acid gas is not being able to flow across that boundary, but rather has to kind of move around it. But ultimately, we see a very similar footprint. Now, just for reference, the contour intervals that are shown on both of these maps correspond to about 4 to 5% gas saturation. Ultimately, the model, the simulation, kicks out 1% contour intervals, but then that makes for quite a messy little diagram to look at. So we did simplify that with displaying these. In addition to giving us some perspective on where the injection plumes might migrate or what the ultimate impact to the subsurface is, we also want to ensure with these simulations that the operations that we propose can be completed within reasonable surface operating pressures, and make sure we have the consistent ability to inject as we propose. So in these two cross plots, we show, which are cross plots of pressure, injection rate versus time, we see that for both scenarios, faults, transmissive and non-transmissive, each case, injection can be maintained at 28.8 million standard cubic feet per day, all within surface injection pressures well below the proposed maximum allowable operating pressure. So in summary, with respect to the reservoir simulations, as modeled, the proposed injection reservoir appears fully capable of receiving the quantities of treated acid gas that is being proposed, or specifically at a rate of up to 28.8 million standard cubic feet per day. This simulation did include a complete 30-year simulation period, ultimately under conservative conditions where the maximum injection volume is maintained day in and day out for 30 years, ultimately giving us a good conservative footprint that that we can ultimately ensure we know which wells these could potentially encounter. In accordance with normal application practices, we did multiple case studies under various fault flow conditions, and in all cases, the proposed activities can be maintained within the allowable operating pressures expected. In general, the plume in both cases, because of a lack of particular restriction from any faults, we see the plume extending approximately 1.8 miles from the treatment facility. Moving back to some of the more required supporting materials for a C-108 application. This application and complete copies of the C-108, and as well as a letter notifying the recipient of Northwind's application were sent via certified mail for all interested parties. Per the normal scheduling processes, the public notice of this hearing was issued by the commission, as well as instructions on how to participate. In general, the AGI well is supportive to local oil and gas operations, as it allows for increased capacity of sour grass resources, ultimately increasing royalties potentially paid to the state of New Mexico. And the proposed design of the well is fully protective of groundwater, and the project is protective of correlative rights. Just to recap and summarize some of the application, Northwind specifically requests approval to drill and operate an additional redundant siluro-devonian acid gas injection well, as well as they seek approval for an increase in the allowable injection volume for those wells. The wells currently completed and the surface facilities have all been designed such that they can safely accommodate an injection system of this type. All relevant interested parties have been properly notified. There is no production within the proposed injection zone within at least 2 miles of this area. And in our analysis of the subsurface and greater project area, we've confirmed that the well has sufficient caprock, both primary through the Woodford Shale, which is extensive in this area, as well as secondary caprock overlying that. The well design is fully protective of groundwater resources that are utilized in this area, and in addition to that, the total well design, which includes multiple telescoping strings of casing, provides numerous redundant physical barriers of cement and steel casing between any adjacent strata and the injection stream. Within the 1 mile area of review, we do know there's one plugged and abandoned well that penetrated the injection zone. We discussed that briefly, the South Lee Federal number 1, but we have reviewed the records for that well, seen its kind of completion and recompletion history, and understand that well to be properly plugged and in a state, in an adequate state. Within, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, and we've talked about it already, but within 2 miles and within the plume, there are additional penetrations that have been identified, and we have plans to monitor and ensure those wells are not risk. Fault slip probability modeling and injection modeling has been completed for the proposed activities, ultimately resulting in a determination that the proposed operations are not going to contribute to an elevated risk for induced seismicity, and ultimately our characterization and our expectations about where this plume will go show that we anticipate the plume extending about 1.8 miles from the Titan facility. So ultimately, in breaking it down, Northwind seeks the Commission's approval to drill, test, and operate Titan AGI number 4 as specified in their C-108 application, which will also include approval of an increase to the combined daily injection volume for Siluro-Devonian wells. The proposed 28.8 million, as I mentioned previously, equates to approximately 13,760 barrels under reservoir conditions, which is commonly very much lower than what we see in some saltwater disposal wells, just for kind of perspective. Northwind is requesting permission to operate the well with a maximum allowable operating pressure of 5,811 psi, which is both determined utilizing OCD's approved methods and in accordance with the MAOP that was approved for the offsetting Salt Creek AGI number 2. In general, approval of this well will increase overall treating capacity at this area, is preventative of waste, and significantly it reduces the potential for flaring both at this facility and in the field, and ultimately prevent any atmospheric release or minimize the atmospheric release potential for any production-related CO2. These wells can be operated as proposed in accordance with the results of geologic modeling, and as well without producing seismicity risk, and ultimately will be fully protective of groundwater and correlative rights.
Mr. White, just in summary, in your opinion, will the granting of this application prevent waste
Yes.
and protect correlative rights?
Yes.
And in your opinion, will it be protective of human health and the environment and sources of fresh water?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. White. At this time, I have no further questions of Mr. White. It would move the admission of exhibits A and B, and I can come back at the end. Actually, Mr. Chair, I think at this point, I may just go ahead and move the admission of all the exhibits that we have that we've been intend to submit with the to the commission, if that's acceptable. I would move the admission of exhibits A and B, which are the application and the C-108, and then the presentation that Mr. White just presented. Exhibit C is a copy of the special warranty deeds that represent Northwind's, at least part of Northwind's good faith basis for its rights to inject. Exhibit D is a copy of the notice letter that went out providing notice of the application and hearing today. And then Exhibit E is a copy of the notice of our affidavit of publication reflecting that we have provided notification of the hearing and application in the newspaper, identifying each of the parties required to receive notice by name. So those are exhibits D and E as well. So I would move the admission of exhibits A, B, C, D, and E to the record.
Mr. Tremaine,
No objection.
they shall be entered.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no further questions of the witness and make him available for cross-examination.
Mr. Tremaine, do you have cross-examination?
I do have a few questions.
Could we take a break then?
Certainly.
Okay, let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back. Thank you. on to track here. Mr. Tremaine, you were at the cusp of cross-examining Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commission, good afternoon, Mr. White. I just have a few clarifying questions for you. So first, as a general matter, I want to ask if you agree to adopt a position stated earlier that Northwind stipulates to the conditions of release outlined in OCD Exhibit number 2 as amended by the agreement discussed on the record earlier.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask you a couple clarifying questions about the tag plume expansion. OCD reviewed prior records, and there was a reference in the Salt Creek AGI number 2 to a plume area of 138 acres. That reference, we want to reconcile that reference with later plume modeling because it didn't appear to comport with the plume depiction. So I think the best way to do that is to have you explain to us in the commission exactly how and how much the plume expansion or the modeling has changed from the Salt Creek AGI number 2 to inclusion of the Salt Creek, or sorry, the Titan AGI number 4. What was it before and how much bigger did it get? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned previously, the history of this particular facility and acid gas injection is a long one, going back to 2018 project development, 2019 application submitted. And so there is a long history of evaluating this site. And at the time, the application that you're referencing was the original Salt Creek AGI number 2 application, which was originally filed by North Salt Creek Midstream in accordance with the commission's requirements for the redundant well. That original order required an application be submitted within 12 months of approval and then construction of that well along another commission-defined schedule. At that time, the history of characterizing acid gas plumes was a little diverse. The reference to 138 acres is based on simply a volumetric determination where average anticipated reservoir porosity is utilized to calculate a volumetric footprint. Ultimately, a scenario in which perfect displacement of water is occurring and is ultimately just one earlier method in describing those plumes. That being said, and recognizing that there are more sophisticated tools for characterizing acid gas plumes, that application, as well as all subsequent applications, did include also reservoir characterization and injection simulation modeling via the Petrel and Eclipse platforms. So while that reference was in there, a complete application section also described the additional reservoir modeling and simulation. And with respect to that, I can't recall. I think Mr. Rankin may have those materials available. But the plume has increased in size from that initial as additional wells are being proposed up to the Titan AGI 4, and ultimately the combined impacts of Salt Creek AGI number 2 and Titan AGI 4.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I want to move on to kind of reiterate questions about the additional wells. So we've heard today some discussion and some testimony about the 4 plugged and abandoned wells that are within the modeled plume. These are, I want to clarify, these are the wells that are referenced on page 38 of Northwind's pre-hearing statement exhibits, correct? And so I just want to clarify that in discussion with the parties in the division, that Northwind is going to comply with condition of approval number 13 in placing surface CO2 and H2S monitors at each of those locations not inclusive of any that may be installed by agreement with Desert Ram.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. I have one question on faults. So you testified a little while ago about the 13 observed faults and subdivided into 24 fault portions. You recall that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm referring, if we need to reference, to pages 30 and 51 of the exhibits, and also to figure on page 113 that you referenced earlier. The question I have is about fault number 9 listed on that sheet, and if I can pull that up, if I can share, if that's helpful. Pardon. Oh, boy. Okay.
Maybe Adam.
No, it's the, sorry. I apologize, the banners get in my way. All right, so scrolling down to the bottom here, do you see the fault listed as number 9?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that particular fault, is the orientation of that fault favorable for failure?
So with respect to the group of faults that are north to south trending, it would be more likely to slip based on the assumption of maximum horizontal stress in a north 75 east orientation.
Okay. And what is the extent of the fault?
The extent, you mean the offset or the lateral extent?
Is it what is the length of the fault, and is it a closed or open fault?
So with the as shown in the scale here, I mean, the length of that particular fault segment would probably be about 1/10 of a mile, utilizing the scale on this particular map. And I'm sorry, what was is it an open
Is
or
it
closed
closed or
fault?
open?
So in many cases, what we obviously we haven't drilled through it or seen this fault, but in many cases where we have these deep faults, these are often locations where oil and gas resources are preserved in three-way closures and things like that. So while we don't have any direct evidence of whether this is transmissive or non-transmissive, if it's isolating pressure across it or anything like that, a lot of these deeper faults are often annealed and non-transmissive.
And are you confident that it is as limited laterally as is portrayed on the map?
In accordance with our evaluation of the seismic data and the ability to identify it across those seismic volumes.
Okay. And apologies if you've already answered this, but was that specific fault observed in 3D seismic data or gravity maps?
These traces are reflective of our interpretation of the 3D seismic.
Okay. And for all of the questions that I just asked you about that particular fault, did you include all consideration of all of those factors in your assessment?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask you one question about the Delaware Mountain Group. So being as Salt Creek AGN number 3 is currently injecting into the Delaware Mountain Group, and the Titan number 4 extends through the Delaware Mountain Group zones, is it Northwind's intention that the portion of the subject well will be cemented encased with H2S and CO2 resistant or otherwise corrosive resistant cement and string?
Yes, and that's included in your proposed or the OCD's proposed conditions of approval. We have no objection to those conditions.
Okay. Condition number 11. Thank you. I want to ask you a question referring back to the Salt Creek AGI number 2. As I think you've outlined in some detail, during the drilling of Salt Creek AGI number 2 well, there was a loss of circulation of drilling mud and weak cement bonds encountered during cementation in the DMG zones and Pennsylvania group. Including specific other formations. But what is Northwind's strategy for adjusting drilling mud density to avoid overbalance drilling?
So with respect to the downhole issues that were difficult in cementing, we're currently evaluating the log data, pulse sonic data, to really get some well-specific information about potential breakdowns and see if we need to ultimately isolate those problematic intervals with an extension of casing or whatnot. Additionally, we will plan to work with cementers to ensure that an appropriate plan is developed for that particular interval, the majority of which was observed in the third intermediate or the production casing interval from the lower Wolf Camp and below.
Okay. Are you planning to employ managed pressure drilling while drilling through the DMG and Pennsylvania group sections?
I think we would be receptive to that.
Okay, thank you. All right. I have a question about step rate test. So following the step rate test, it's our understanding that Northwind intends to stimulate reserve bound fractures, secondary porosity zones, and dissolve any natural carbonate cement. What stimulation surface pressure do you plan to utilize?
I mean, I think it would be ultimately in accordance with what the step rate test would show as being within fracture pressure boundaries.
Thank you. One more question. Has Northwind observed any hydrate formation in the subsurface safety valves in Salt Creek AGI number 3 or any other AGI wells operated by Northwind?
Not that's observable. I mean, those components were installed and haven't been, removed from the well, but any operating conditions that would be indicative of potential hydrate formation and perforation plugging has not been observed.
Okay. And okay, so just to clarify, do you agree that hydrate formation can potentially occur in subsurface valves due to the Thompson's effect?
I haven't observed that happening.
Has not observed. Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Rankin, did you have anything to redirect?
Just one small series. Mr. White, Mr. Tremaine asked you a couple questions about some of the earlier volumetric simplified approaches that you undertook or GLX undertook to evaluate the plume extent for the AGI number 2. Do you recall those questions?
Yes, I do.
I just want to understand make sure the record is clear about the timing and when that was last presented to the commission and what the current model for the AGI-2 is that was last presented to the commission, just so we're clear on the timeline. So the last time that the GLX submitted that simplified volumetric approach, that was part of the analysis or first pass analysis of the plume extent was that was back in October of 2023 under case number 23943 involving the AGI number 2, correct?
That's correct. And ultimately, as I mentioned, that was just another method in characterizing a plume. And to be clear, at that time in 2023, that characterization and that description was no longer utilized. Mm-hmm. It was included in that resubmittal of that application only because that application had previously been submitted to the OCD for technical review by Salt Creek Midstream in 2020. So we ultimately, in resubmitting that on behalf of Northwind Midstream at the NMOCD's request, we didn't want to muddy the waters by taking something they'd seen, reviewed, and start changing things, and ultimately muddy the water.
So that, based on that application back in October 2023, the commission remanded that application to the division, and that was approved under SWD 2580, correct?
That's correct.
But Northwind never drilled that well under that approved order, and instead submitted an application to amend 2580, correct?
That is correct.
And in that application to amend 2580, did GeoLex include the simplified volumetric analysis of the plume extent?
No, that description was not included.
Okay, and so in that second application to amend the AGI number 2, only the more detailed, robust plume modeling using the most up-to-date geologic data was submitted to the division, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and then that was submitted to the division in June of 2024, correct?
That's correct.
And then it was approved by the division under SWD 2622, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so the current valid order that under which AGI number 2 operates has no reference to or reliance on any plume model that references 138 acres or anything on that order, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Just want to make sure the record was clear about that. No further questions.
Excellent. Thank you. Can this witness be excused?
Unless the commission has
Oh,
questions.
sorry, forgot. You have it was a part I was forgetting about. My apologies. All right. Thank you. Commissioners. Sorry, Mr. White. Commissioner Bloom, we'll start with you.
We'll let Dr. Mpoma go first here.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. White, thanks so much for being here today. I do have a couple of questions for you. I guess probably you might have anticipated that, but hopefully we'll be quick. So I'm going to go through, I do have questions on some of your slides. So you mentioned that the new well that has been proposed, that is AGI number 4, is going to be a deviated well. Why a deviated well?
So with Northwind's acquisition of the facility, one of their ultimate goals was to better understand the subsurface and make sure prior to constructing any of these that they understood that they had the best chance of a good performing well. And so that ultimately led to their acquisition of 3D seismic data, which both improved our characterization of the structure as well as allowed us the opportunity to better characterize porosity and porosity interconnectivity through seismic impedance analysis. The results of that analysis showed very little porosity development directly underlying the facility. So a vertical well was a greater risk to not being able to meet the injection volumes that they desired. So Salt Creek AGI number 2, we submitted that amendment application that Mr. Rankin referenced to change from a vertical well to a deviated well. And the subsequent development of the Titan AGI 4 application also proposed a deviated well for the same anticipated problems of low porosity in a vertical well. However, another porosity anomaly to the northwest was targeted, ultimately to reduce any potential interference between the two wells and separate the points of injection.
So is the let's say the bottom hole location, is it still on north wind facility or land?
Yes.
Okay. Then why was it not, like, why was the well not proposed to be drilled at that location?
As a vertical well?
Yes.
Ultimately, because the design of the Titan facility now, Northwind's facility, does centralize acid gas injection and compression and process units there. So that could be a valid move, but it tips the scales a little bit. Then you have to transmit treated acid gas at the surface where personnel are, and poses a little bit more environmental risk.
Oh, so that is mostly to protect the environment and also the health of the
Correct.
people that are working. Okay, thank you. Okay. So Mr. Shamin tried to discuss with you a little bit about some of the lessons learned,
Mhm.
with regards to how are you going to be able to drill through DMG group that already do have, let's say, acid gas already in there. Do you have, based on your responses back and forth, it sounds to me that there's not more like a written documentation as to the process, as to how Northwind is going to, the measures that you're going to take to make sure that this well is not junk. Is there a documentation that really lays that out?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Is there documentation that lays out the procedure to be able to incorporate all the lessons learned from the previous well to make sure that this well is not junked?
So there's not any documentation at the moment. In planning the drilling activities for Titan AGI-4, drilling plans will be developed that are the vehicle for submitting those to the agency would be the C-102, C-101 application for permit to drill. So that will be a document of how we plan to address those potential hazard zones. And as I mentioned, if we will be continuing to review the recently collected log data from AGI number 2 to see if we can better suss out exactly where those intervals of greater risk are, and if we need to coordinate any slight change in casing setting depths or anything that to be able to better account for that, then we would coordinate that with the agencies and make sure that an appropriate plan is determined.
Is it your testimony that annulus pressure is going to be utilized or considered?
In the form of MPD?
Mm-hmm.
I think I may not be the one drilling the well. So I think my testimony as to what will be utilized, I may not have the ability to say, yes, we will utilize that.
So would that be part of the drilling prognosis that will be discussed with NMOCD? Because there has to be a plan to make sure that, we are protecting the environment, the people that are also drilling. And from the previous experience, this could be very dangerous, right? So I want to see that Northwind is committing, to more or less document the approach that they are going to utilize to make sure they minimize the risk. And that needs to be more or less discussed with the division for their approval. I want to see something like that.
Yeah, and my thoughts and my testimony would be, in my interactions with Northwind, my suspicion is they probably would not have any issues making that commitment and that planning and drilling this next well. However, like I said, I may not be the one involved with it, so.
Okay. And then you talked about the maximum allowable operating pressure, just based on the information that is available today. And after the step rate test, that number is going to be more or less updated if necessary. Is that your testimony?
Yeah, if necessary. Obviously, if we see the results of injection testing that make that proposed pressure not a feasible or realistic, then yes. And that's I think that language and that expectation is also included in NMOCD's conditions of approval and guidance.
So AGI number 2 and AGI number 4, which one is the main well and which one will be a redundant well, or they are all main wells?
Well, so I think between AGI 2 and number 4, they're deep Siluro Devonian wells, both targeting targeting similar porosity anomalies. So I think ideally, I think they're run at the same time in order to maintain their operational readiness. But I think based on our results simulation and hopefully supported by operating conditions, that either one of them could be the redundant.
Okay, so what is the distance between AGI number 2 and AGI number 4, mostly on the bottom holes?
From the two bottom
yeah, from
holes.
the
This is purely from memory, but the AGI number 2 was deviated approximately 1,200 feet to the southeast. A similar deviation is anticipated. I think it might be a little longer for the Titan AGI 4. So you're probably looking at, 20 or somewhere just shy of 3,000 feet.
Oh, 3,000 feet between them.
Between the two.
Um,
or maybe a little more because their surface locations are separated as well. So greater than 3,000 feet. It's probably very comparable to the separation distance between the Independence AGI wells to the north.
So the reason why I'm sure probably you know where I'm going with the distance between them. So when those locations were identified, was there discussion whether to more or less utilize these wells separately, or one is going to be dependent, or more or less one is going to be redundant?
At this time, I don't think any of those discussions have been had. I think it would be, ultimately based on the reservoir characteristics and their ability to receive gas, rather than having something preliminary as one versus the other.
Yeah, so let's say, and if you can specify in your application, specifically on the summary side, specifically the distance between them, I'm more concerned about the pressure interference. In your simulation models, you didn't show any pressure between the two wells from the two, let's say, scenarios that you provided. So I don't know how that pressure is evolving. You only showed bottom hole pressures, which gets to about, let's say, 9,000. But if you do the calculation for what the fracture pressure will be, you are probably around, like, let's say 11,000 PSI. But I didn't see any pressure maps to show the evolution of the pressure compared to, let's say, how you showed the CO2 or the TAC gas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those bottom holes are reflective of, point of injection, just like, where we might expect those pressures to be the highest at the end of the 30-year simulation.
Let me run quickly to the simulation side so I can at least check and go home soon. And you also showed the overpressure conditions using the resistivity logs and then also the sonic log on your slide 32. I really do like that pressure profiles based on the logs. But my question is, which log was that? Which log did you use for that?
Mr. Rankin, could you get me the slide he's referencing?
Slide 32.
So these logs are this is an excerpt from the Rittenhouse publication where he's summarizing pore pressure and overpressured conditions based on his analysis of those data. So this is more generally representative of the Eastern Delaware Basin.
But not your, let's say, information from the AGI number 2, or was it 3?
Well, yeah, but AGI 2 at this time the application was put together was not drilled. we just recently drilled
I
it.
got you.
Yeah.
I got you.
But yes, and not part of this application, so it would be something else brought in the 11th hour. But we did just file the reservoir evaluation and some of the final documents for that well that do have the preliminary fracture gradient analysis and things like that.
Okay, I got you. Now, on your slide number 37, you showed the averages of the porosity permeabilities that were utilized on the 8 layers. Is this a heterogeneous model or homogeneous model?
With respect to, I mean, it's not homogeneous. I mean, it is these are the average values for those layers, but that is heterogeneous in that it is guided by the impedance attributes.
On slide 38, quick one. So which formation are you representing here?
This is the model, total model.
It includes all the injection zones.
That's correct.
And which of these target zones was taking most of the fluid, most of the tag?
The Fusselman.
The Fusselman. Now on slide 40, so you showed the 2 scenarios that you run, transmissive and non-transmissive faults. Now, so Mr. Shamin asked about the faults that were shown, whether these are transmissive or not. You present this scenario to more or less show either case scenario, either being the worst case scenario or more promising scenario. But I know that you geologists do have another way to calculate the transmissibility. So why did you not use that, especially if you have wells within that area?
Ultimately, it's in accordance with the kind of end member conditions that are conservative that these applications are commonly presenting.
So you don't believe that we have to use more robust approach, like let's say using the shield gauge ratio, the Speravic models to be able to get a more representative for transmissibility?
I'm not saying I'm not on board with that, but it's ultimately the question of where do you want to be able to, get to both end members versus are you trying to history match and get to, replicate the exact, right?
So let's use one of your maps, so probably slide 41. If you could have superimposed the faults on this, could have been really great, because your case 1 and case 2, you are predicting almost the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to see that superimposed on the fault so I can more or less visualize and be able to more or less ask more in-depth questions on that. But it's okay. How is this map that you're showing us, how is it going to change post-injection?
So this would be speculative, but I mean, I would think, in terms of acid gas injecting into saline fluids, there will be a buoyancy component. So structure will likely exert some control on what this does. In this area where we do see the injections are dipping to the southwest, we might expect that as it kind of reaches a stabilization point, that does move slightly towards the east, northeast. But ultimately, I mean, that's just kind of speculating, based on the geometries of the reservoir.
So is there no requirement with regards to post-injection monitoring for AGI wells?
Not under the UIC program in terms of.
So once the injection is done, no monitoring will take place after that?
I mean, I think that's going to be in accordance with the plugging and abandonment procedures when these things are ready, which I'm ready to be brought offline. I think realistically, during those activities, an appropriate monitoring plan will be in place for these types of wells.
Okay, I think probably that would be a question for OCD, since you said it's not really a requirement. And then I like the simulation that was done, but I read through the document, so I do know that you initialized the model with 0.433 psi per foot as a normal pressure for the reservoir. pressure, right? But aside that, and then also the porosity permeability, you don't have any information with regards to the initialization, how you initialize the model. I did not see any relative term in your, let's say, in anywhere in your document. I didn't see any of that.
Okay. I mean, those materials are available, just not included in the package of C-108 application and these presentation materials.
Then let me ask you, what was the residual water saturation?
I mean, I don't have those values handy at the moment. I think we could probably find those, but it would be speculative for me to tell you what the residual water saturation is.
So on your slide 43, like I said earlier on, you showed the injection profile, you showed the BHP, that is the bottom hole pressure, you've shown the surface pressure, and then also you've shown the maximum allowable pressure. But what I do not see here is the actual reservoir pressure. So can you superimpose the actual reservoir pressure on this particular plot?
I mean, at what point? I mean, we can provide ultimately the outputs of the model. I mean, we can provide mapped reservoir pressure, but I mean, where would be the appropriate place to report reservoir pressure? Up gradient?
No. I mean, you run Eclipse. Eclipse can show you what is the average reservoir pressure. That would be the pressure for the entire model.
Okay.
Because, you know, as I did the calculation, your fracture pressure, and let me ask, what was the fracture pressure though? What was the fracture pressure?
So in Salt Creek AGI #2 injections testing, which went up to 10 barrels per minute, we did not identify a clear fracture pressure. And utilizing, we didn't reach it in terms of those data. And utilizing the dipole sonic, well, we could show those curves, or those curves are available in the final reservoir evaluation. But if I'm recalling correctly, for average fracture pressures in the Devonian, Risson, or Fusselman, they were upwards of 0.65 psi per foot. There was a minimal point observed potentially in the top of the Devonian that went down to 0.59 according to that fracture gradient analysis. But for this particular well, that ended up behind casing.
Yeah, then if we did not reach the fracture pressure, what was the purpose of the step retest in the first place?
Well, ultimately, I mean, the purpose would be to see if we can flow volumes that we think that the well is being designed for through the well under what we have approved as a maximum allowable operating pressure.
So then was it more like, you utilize that as more like as an injection test more than a step retest?
Well, I mean, ultimately, we'd like to do both, but eventually, you know, within those limits of testing tubing, you know, we end up getting a lot of friction for another rate in the step rate test when we start reaching 9, 10, 11 barrels per minute. And so ultimately, the objective of the test would be to try and identify exactly what that fracture pressure is, but it doesn't always happen.
You know, definitely in the future, when you are presenting this, definitely I want to see what you are showing here, unless maybe you labeled the pressure as a BHP, probably that was a BHP at that particular well that, but which of these wells are you showing for case 1 and case 2 though?
So this would be Titan, the well
And
that's the subject of today.
Okay. So definitely a reservoir pressure, you know, if you go to your table, you looked at, you showed, now on this particular model, did you also include any additional wells in the area?
So we did not for this, ultimately because the nearest wells are AGI wells about 7 miles away. The one SWD well that was included in fault slip probability simulations is even significantly farther. So ultimately, we don't expect to have much impact on dispersion directions and or anything like that.
So is it your testimony that after reviewing all the pressure profiles, the pressure at the bottom hole, the average reservoir pressure at the bottom hole did not exceed the 0.65 psi per foot?
That's correct.
But it would be great if you can show some evidence of that, to, let's say, the commission. Like I said, I do appreciate the simulation that was done, but certainly giving more information about how the model was set up, help us to be able to fully understand. But Chair, I yield to you. I don't want to continue. I'm good.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Bloom.
Thank you very much for your testimony today and your time in the chair there. Just a couple quick questions. Looking at page 110 in the presentation, you mentioned the South Lee Federal Number 1, noting that it's about 1.1 miles from the proposed AGI well. It's the only one that goes down to that same depth. Into the Solero Devonian. It was plugged in 2015. Many ways, and I think this has been mentioned here before, that AGIs also function as a carbon capture, and we've had some carbon capture legislation recently in the state, and I know there's been at least one place in the U.S. where there was communication between carbon capture well and some water wells. Clearly the water wells here are, I don't know, 16,000 feet higher or something like that. But how do we know that? I guess two questions. One, do we anticipate, and I think we would, that the plume will reach the South Lee Federal Number 1? And then how do we know that the plugs are sufficient to be protective?
Well, I think we ultimately want to review those well documents to see what exactly was in place there. I don't think you're going to find a lot of instances where a well is plugged with some very modern acid-resistant cement that's going to make you very comfortable with it. But we ultimately want to identify which wells are potentially in the path of the plume and make sure we have a good understanding of what's been put in there. So we look for in evaluating those well documents, we look to see what the production history of the well was, what was done after that. In this particular well, we know that it was perforated in the Devonian, that those perforations were squeezed, and that interval was isolated via cement plugs and a cast iron bridge plug, pretty much directly overlying the Devonian, where it was then recompleted to the Mississippian section, Strana, Tocamaro, I think it was Atoka, and ultimately served its operational life there. From that point, we know that multiple plugs were placed in that well as it was fully completed. So at least from that perspective, we know that this didn't just get one plug and a cast iron bridge plug and then it's put to bed. We know that the level of plugging was substantial. Outside of that, I think identifying it as a potential well with risk to encountering the plume, having that understanding up front and knowing it is something that we need to keep an eye on or is potentially in that path, is also what we do. And then most recently, this particular well, as we've kind of discussed here and there throughout today, we'll have surface monitoring as well that kind of help to close the loop on that. This will be one of the 4 penetrating wells that is referenced by the division's conditions regarding monitoring of that well site.
And so this, the South Lee Federal number 1, that will be part of the monitoring
Yes, it
program.
is one
Okay.
of the 4 wells included in it.
Okay. And can you say a little bit more about what that monitoring program looks like with respect to this well?
So the monitoring program, and this is something that the division has been helping with lately with respect to AGI wells, but it ultimately involves around a plugged well installing soil CO2 flux monitors, and those monitors are positioned around the wells ultimately because they're the direct conduit should those cement plugs fail to the zone that's being utilized for acid gas. And so ultimately, if there is issues with those wells from an integrity standpoint, where they are transmitting acid gas to the surface, then it would be detectable in those types of monitoring programs or identifiable.
So is it the hydrogen sulfide that would trigger an alarm and then there's a shutdown, or how's that work?
So in this case, the monitoring that is proposed or those soil monitors would be carbon dioxide. Those hydrogen sulfide detectors are commonly utilized at gas facilities and could also be a component of that monitoring system.
Okay, thank you.
And that just leaves me. Commissioner Bloom actually kind of hit the questions that I had regarding the Lee Federal. So thank you for that also, and thank you for your testimony today. Mr. Rankin, do you mind bringing up, I believe it was slide 40 and 41 or 41 and 42, which were the plume models? No, that's okay. I apologize. I may have the wrong number. Perfect. So between these two case simulation results, on case number 1, you stated that the approximate predicted plume would be about 1.8 miles from the Titan treating facility. And I understood that one. In number 2, the part I didn't quite catch in the testimony, is that case number 2 also 1.8 miles from the treating facility as a plume?
Yeah, ultimately, and measuring it more precisely, it may differ. It may not be exact, but ultimately, while there are faults in the area, they're not significantly continuous big walls that are going to significantly deflect which way the plume is going. So there are faults in the area, but none of them are particularly restricted or restrictive of flow at the location of the well. So we see the morphology or the shape of the footprint of the plume looking very similar between the two of them. Where it does encounter what Mr. Rankin has up showing right now, where this simulation, which is under faults being non-transmissive to fluids, we do see some deflection of the plume a little bit, where it does get in proximity to those faults. But in general, the immediate area doesn't really have any big walls that would prevent normal kind of displacement of those gases.
Okay, thank you. That's the only question I had. Yes,
I
Commissioner.
do have one. So looking at this, and then also the faults, can you tell us, how you set the fault in your model? What was the vertical displacement of your fault in your model?
So you can see, if you were to go back, Mr. Rankin, if you could go back to the 3D render of the model. So the top layer is essentially informed by, oh, can you keep going back? So there was one slide, I don't know what figure it is, but it shows a screen capture of the model, the 3D. Yeah. So you can see how the seismic data, you can see kind of faults in the area, and how those seismic surfaces are showing those faults.
Well, so what is the top layer though? The one blue, what is that?
So that would be the zone 1 of the model. So from the structural grid, the model was just built down evenly based on those thicknesses.
So the Devonian and the Woodford is not shown here?
Yeah, this shows the top. This is a render showing the top of the Siluro-Devonian. So the Woodford-Devonian interface.
But I remember Mr. Shemaine asked you about the lateral, or let's say the extent of the fault. And even in your testimony, you're saying that the fault does not go through the Devonian, the Woodford, right? You said it doesn't go to the top rock. So where does it get to?
No, I said it doesn't displace. It's not offsetting strata greater than the thickness of the Woodford. So it's not.
I thought I heard that. No, even I read that, and I don't want to delay, but essentially based on the exchange between you and Mr. Shemaine, it was more like the fault doesn't go through the Devonian, the Woodford. That was my understanding. Because if you look at this and then you're saying that that is the top of the Devonian, then right there you can see the displacement right there. So there's a high possibility that some of the faults are cutting through the Woodford.
Yeah, and that's kind of characteristic of many of these deep faults. Often go through the Woodford and die out in the Mississippian or something like that. But what's critical is or one thing that we want to make sure of is that the throw on that fault doesn't exceed the thickness of the Woodford, so that over the project area you're not emplacing porous Devonian strata next to your offsetting your cap rock.
But you didn't show any testimony to show us in terms of vertical sense where does the plume. I think you had one plot that was showing the extent vertically of the plume. Would that be correct? I think you had.
Yeah, there's cross-sectional.
Yeah, the cross section. So let's go to one of the cross sections. So definitely you see the CO2 right, assuming that is the top of the Devonian or which one?
Mm-hmm.
No, on the right. So the top will be what?
The top of the injection zone.
But you see it's right at the top. So I wanted to see if you can superimpose the Woodford right on there so we can see whether there is any vertical migration of your plume into the Woodford. And at what point does it stop? Is it going above the Woodford?
Well, I think for this particular model that wasn't incorporated into it. The Woodford itself is well demonstrated in terms of confinement. But this particular model did not include the overlying Woodford.
Then you are making, so then that is where you are confusing me, because your model, you just built it right from the Devonian without any cap rock on top of it. And then we say that there is a fault that can probably penetrate through the Woodford. And we want to know whether that tag is going to be contained or not. But this model is not really showing that. Right at the top, you will see that right at the Woodford interface, assuming the Woodford is there, you just build a model based on the injection zone without any cap rock in there. So you are not showing us the extent of the vertical migration of your plume. So how does this model help us with containment?
Well, I think the primary objective of the model being to understand tag displacement within the injection zone. I think it's not in this form. It doesn't consider variabilities in the cap rock, but rather relies on the demonstrated nature of or the demonstrated performance of the Woodford in the Permian.
So in this area, is there any activity in the Woodford that you know of?
In terms of production?
Yeah.
No.
No, but no horizontal wells.
No.
In this area. Well, I don't know how an MOCD looked at this, but I mean, if you look at right on top, and it's good that the chair brought it up, you see right top here, you have the tag saturation, and we do have faults that can penetrate through that. And we are not seeing how those faults in the Woodford, how is shaping up the plume. So I don't know how this model shows us the containment of the tag, especially right on top. You see that it is of higher saturation, above 30%. So I'm not sure how this model helps us with containment. But let me say that in subsequent updates, definitely you need to add a caprock to it and then show us, the faults, how the plume of the tag, is responding to that of the faults. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. It's been a long one. I had no other questions, I think, from the commission for Mr. White. Can Mr. White be excused now?
No questions for me.
Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. Mr. White, thank you. Appreciate it. Let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll get with the OCD. We'll be back at 3:51. Okay. We'll get back on the record. Mr. Rankin, were there any other witnesses that you had for
We
today?
had no other witnesses, Mr. Chair, so we close our case and allow for other parties to present their cases.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Tremaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The division would call Mr. Millian Geber-Michael.
Excellent. Mr. Geber-Michael, if you'll come up, please.
Yes, sir. You can take your.
Please don't forget to turn on the microphone. Excellent. And Mr. Chandler will swear you in.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Can you state your name and spell your name?
My name is Millian Geber-Michael, spelled Million. And last name is Gebremichael.
Mr. Tremaine, he's been sworn in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, good afternoon, Mr. Geber-Michael. Mr. Geber-Michael, where do you work and what is your position?
I work for the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resource Department as part of the group responsible oversight for the underground injection control program for Oil and Gas Conservation Division.
And did you prepare a curriculum vitae in preparation for this hearing?
Yes, I did.
Is that OCD exhibit number 3?
Yes, sir.
Have you testified before the commission before?
Yes, I did.
And have you been tendered and admitted as an expert in the areas of petroleum engineering previously by the commission?
Yes.
If there's no objection, I would move admission of OCD exhibit number 3 and tender Mr. Geber-Michael as an expert in the area of petroleum engineering.
No objection.
Okay, it shall be entered. Mr. Geber-Michael, can we just have your microphone just a little lowered so it'll be closer to your mouth? Thank you.
Mr. Geber-Michael, have you reviewed the application and submission by Northwind related to the Titan AGI number 4 application?
Yes.
And what is your summary opinion of the application?
The Northwind Midstream Partners application to the injection the tag into the Siluro-Dovinian formation through Titan number 4 is designed to ensure safe and effective injection. The acquisition of well-tailored 3D seismic data for the injection project area addresses concern regarding the presence of faults that would be impacted by the injection pressure and then lead to the induced seismicity. Additionally, Northwind's proposed use of managed pressure drilling will significantly reduce the likelihood of whether underbalance or overbalance conditions while drilling. Constructing the well with premium H2S CO2 resistant cement and strings will ensure that the well will inject safe in an efficient manner.
Mr. Geber-Michael, did OCD have any concerns with the application and the proposed location and depth of the proposed AGI well, the Titan number 4?
Yes, part of our concern was addressed during the testimony, but the plume model constructed by Northwood for Salt Creek AGI number 2 covers an area of 138 acres, while the resultant plume expansion for both Salty Creek AGI number 2 and the Titan AGI number 4 is estimated to be 5.22 square miles, which is equivalent to 3,328 acres. The 24-fold expansion of the plume upon adding the new subject well requires a detailed explanation, but I am afraid it was explained adequately. Furthermore, there are 4 plugged wells that penetrate the Devonian or the injection zone of the subject well. These wells are located between 1 to 2 miles from the bottom hole subject well, were constructed and abandoned using non-H2S and then non-CO2 resistant strings and cement. So OCD believes that the tag eventually would migrate through those wells. So as a condition of approval, OCD would require Northwind to regularly monitor those wells for any presence of tag plume at the surface. Also, the OCD would like them to integrate those into their H2S contingency plan. Both the Northwind, also the owners of the abandoned wells, it has to be integrated in their H2S contingency plan.
Thank you. Mr. Geber-Michael, did you prepare OCD Exhibit Number 1, a summary of USC Class 2 acid gas injection wells?
Yes, I did.
And what was the purpose of preparing OCD's Exhibit Number 1?
Well, the purpose is it reflects, it mirrors what the Northwind expert explained, the timeline between the wells to avoid any confusion with the sequence of numerical numbers, AGI1, AGI2, AGI3. Basically, AGI3 is the abandoned AGI number 1. Once it got abandoned, so they had to drill AGI number 320 feet away from the abandoned well, so they have to change the name to AGI number 3. So the reason we prepared that timeline is to clarify to the commission which well is plugged and abandoned, which is AGI number 1, and then which well is actively injecting, which is AGI number 3, which is the Delaware Mountain Group 1, right, which is the shallowest one. And then AGI number 2 just got it went through the MIT, and then it just got completed. And then AGI Titan number 4 is the subject of we're discussing, and then the authority to inject hasn't been granted yet. So the whole purpose is to clarify to the commission what those sequence numbers are.
Mr. Geber-Michael, you heard the testimony earlier today of Mr. David White. Is there any part of his testimony or explanation that needs to be clarified or in terms of what you just explained, or any other content on that slide that you need to bring to the attention of the commission?
Yeah, there are quite a few of them. For instance, the one that was requested by the commission member, Dr. Palma, is the nature of the fault number 9 that we discussed. OCD would like to know the full nature of that fault in terms of its extent, in terms of its orientation, to address the question whether it cuts through the Woodford or not. We really need to know a full detail nature of that fault.
Okay. Thank you for that, Mr. Geber-Michael. I think I asked a poorly constructed question. In terms of the timeline and understanding of the process of the permitting of these wells, the content of OCD Exhibit Number 1, do you have any discrepancies between your understanding and what was presented earlier? Do we need to go over that? Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you. Did you also prepare for this exhibit OCD, or for this hearing, OCD Exhibit Number 2?
Yes.
And what is the content of OCD Exhibit Number 2?
Well, the content number 2 is the condition of approval for AGI wells. The commission is aware of with our regular condition of approvals for AGI wells, except for this subject well, we added 3 new conditions, which are condition number 3. Condition number 3 is about the assignment of the maximum surface injection pressure will be determined after the operator conducts a step rate test. And then we're also going to subtract a 10% of safety factor as depicted in the step rate test graph, pressure versus rate. So the other also we added is also the injection rate will be depending on the outcome of the step rate pressure. So if you go to the graph, once you locate the pressure, the corresponding rate is going to be the maximum injection rate. If you would like me to clarify this, what I meant is the operator is requesting a 28.8 million per day, right? However, it will be determined based on the step rate test. Once you find your fracture gradient, determine the maximum pressure, the corresponding rate is going to be the rate.
So, Mr. Geber-Michael, let me clarify for a second. So the exhibit number 2, in general, are conditions of approval that OCD has recommended before and that the commission has reviewed before in prior AGI applications, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. And condition number 3, as you just outlined, that's a new condition, and you just explained that, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are there, is condition number 11, is that a new condition?
It is a new condition given the situation that we have a shallower well, the AGI number 3, which is injecting into a Delaware Mountain group. And also we have a subject well that goes through the Delaware Mountain group. So the subject well will be subjected by that active injection zone at the Delaware Mountain group. And then OCD is recommending that part of the well covered with corrosion resistant alloys and then corrosion resistant cement.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other, I believe you referenced 3, what's the other new or modified condition?
Well, there is condition number 13 as well.
Could you please explain that one for the commission?
So the condition number 13 is given the nature of the project area. As we mentioned earlier, we have 4 plugged wells. And then the commission, the division is requesting that a surface monitoring of CO2 H2S being deployed, and then also this procedure integrated in their H2S contingency plan.
Okay, Mr. Geber-Michael, I believe that you would have heard earlier today the discussion of the parties' agreement to modify the monitoring plan and condition number 18 in terms of the rate. Actually, I should split those up. So I believe, did you hear the testimony or discussion about modifying the placement of additional surface monitoring?
Yes, I did. And then we concur with that, increasing the frequency of updating the plume model. Traditionally, we have it every 5 years, but given the situation in lieu of having a monitoring wells by updating the plume model every 2 years would help us to monitor the plume growth.
Great, thank you. So that's in respect to condition number 18 modification?
Yes, sir.
And does OCD have any concerns with the placement of any additional surface monitoring equipment at the water wells that were discussed earlier?
No, we don't. We don't. It's an abundance of precaution, and then we agree with that one.
Okay. Is there anything else in OCD's conditions of approval, OCD exhibit number 2, that you need to bring to the attention of the commission?
No.
Okay. At this time, Mr. Chair, I would move admission of OCD exhibit number 1 and OCD exhibit number 2.
Mr. Rankin?
No objection.
Okay, it shall be admitted.
One moment, Mr. Chair. Mr. Geber-Michael, when you review an application such as the AGI application for the Titan AGI number 4, what standard of review do you apply, and what, in your role, what are you evaluating the application for?
So we review the application that it protects, the collaborative rights, and then protects, health and property, and then the natural resources. Those are the standards that we put.
Okay, and we've talked through the exhibits already in OCD exhibit number 2. And those have been admitted. Do you believe that after your review, the content of the application and including the conditions of approval listed in OCD Exhibit Number 2, that an order and permit will be protective of correlative rights, public health, and the environment, including underground sources of drinking water.
Yes.
And those are my questions in direct, nothing further.
Excellent. Mr. Rankin.
I have no questions of Mr. Geber-Michael.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners.
Mr. Chair, I do have a few. Thank you so much for your testimony. So I just want to start with the condition number 3. And you've explained to us with regards to after the step rate test, you're going to make, that is when the maximum surface injection pressure and even the rate is going to be more or less settled, not necessarily what is being proposed today.
Yes, sir.
Now, based on Mr. White's testimony, he talked about just the well that they just drilled, right? When they did a step rate test, they did not get to the fracture pressure. So when that instance happens, what happens to number 3?
Yeah, so what we did with Salt Creek number 2 is it does happen sometimes. You could reach a maximum pressure and then you don't notice the breakdown of the formation. So what we did is we asked them to provide us a poisons ratio based on the poisons ratio and then offsetting wells fracture gradient in the past. Actually, the Salt Creek AGI number 2, the fracture gradient was in par with the historical offsetting wells, and then it agrees also with the poisons ratio. So 0.67 is an acceptable fracture gradient. So what makes it different to this one is, so now once you have that fracture gradient and then you calculate your maximum pressure, the corresponding rate on the x-axis is going to be your rate. And then our experience from AGI number 2, Salt Creek number 2, is that rate is actually even higher than what they are requesting.
There's more room there.
There's more room there to wiggle. That's why we take that 10% safety factor. We deduct a 10% safety factor always.
Okay. So I believe you reviewed the model. Do you believe this model is sufficient, to be able to answer questions like the faults,
The faulty.
the plume movement, and more or less like the containment?
I do agree with your assessment, Mr. Commissioner, in terms of including the Woodford or integrating in part of the model. The reason why we ask that fault number 9 that we mentioned is we really want to know the extent, its orientation, its length, whether it's a sealed fault or an open fault. If we know the extent of that fault, we would have a good idea whether it's going to cut through the 370 feet of Woodford confining or not. So that was the question that we asked. So in the future, it would be prudent to add the confining zone part of the modeling.
Okay. So is your testimony that for today, it's not a concern, but we can push it to next 2 years when they do the update on the model?
Yes, I would. It's not a concern because of what we have seen with Salt Creek number 2, other AGI wells. We believe the Woodford provides sufficient, but that changes with your 3D seismicity. When new 3D seismics come and then I identify new faults, you really want to learn the nature of those faults. In this scenario, the question that we posed, OCD would like to really know the nature of that fault.
Okay. So I went back and forth with Mr. White about the plume extent, that he showed with transmissive and then non-transmissive faults. Now, this is at the end of 30 years, but it's not a concern, like in terms of the monitoring. So as part of the AGIs, NMOCD doesn't require any monitoring post-injection?
Yeah, that basically a post-injection to us is when they cease injecting, the well is being plugged and abandoned.
But in the model, it's not shown when the tag is going to stop moving, even after the injection.
It doesn't. That is something we really need to implement in our future requirements. Yeah.
So is this something that you are more or less telling the commission that you're going to look into it?
Yes. Our understanding in the past was the, tagging and abandoning the well would sequester it and then stop it moving. But it's something that we can consider. Yeah.
Okay. And then I will also suggest that in future applications, at least they have, let's say you plug the well at the end of the injection, but the plume, they need to show us when is the plume going to stop. Because if the plume is still moving after, let's say, you've shut the well and everything is all, let's say, blocked, where is that plume going? Is it?
Yes. Even the nature of the CO2 buoyancy nature, it's not going to be an easy feat, but it's something that we could ask the operators and then the division to come up with some kind of monitoring in post-injection. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Bloom.
No questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Kerber-Michael, just to the commission understands, just to solidify it, with the proposed injection rates and with the components of that the OCD has put into place to make sure that this works out, you think that public safety is maintained, correlative rights are maintained, that this model will suffice and provide what this commission would be concerned with from now and potentially into the future?
Yes.
Okay, that's my only question as well. There's no other, Mr. Tremaine, no other questions? Mr. Rankin?
No, I appreciate the opportunity.
Excellent. May Mr. Gerber-Michael be excused?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So now, commissioners, we just need to decide what we want to do, correct? You may step down. Sorry, Mr. Gerber-Michael, my apologies. Okay, commissioners. I guess, the question is there a motion to approve the way it was provided to us? And if so, can I get a motion for it?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the permit in this case.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I second.
Okay, so the permit will be approved with the conditions that were set out by the OCD. Mr. Tremaine.
Point of information. I think the commission may want to consider a motion to approve with the conditions, but with condition number 8 modified to reflect a 2-year modeling. We have not during the day modified condition number 18 as far as the submission. And that's the 5 years. The agreement of the other parties was to modify condition number 18 to reflect a 2-year modeling period.
My apologies. I thought we did that this morning. So, okay, with modified, we can modify in number 8 or number 18?
18.
Okay.
I may have misunderstood. I just wanted to be clear for the record, Mr. Chair, because when you referenced the exhibit as submitted, it still says 5 years.
Okay. So with the modification for number 18, so we will do with what the OCD submitted with the modification for number 18 to 2 years instead of 5 years, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. Mr. Tremaine, did I say that correctly?
I believe so.
Okay, Mr. Rankin, you agree?
I do.
Okay, commissioners.
Mr. Chair, I'm wondering if we want to see a draft order and then perhaps approve it at the next meeting and sign after, or perhaps trying to think of another way to do this to finish the business today. perhaps an order is drafted and we review. Sheila could typically send it to us to sign. If we want to do it that way, I'm not quite sure what your preference is.
Suggestion from the parties.
Well, in the old days, Mr. Chair, we would draft a proposed order for the commission to consider after sharing it with the parties and getting their input. And in order to facilitate the work of the commission and commission council, I'm more than happy to work with Mr. Tremaine and get a draft proposed order submitted in advance of the next commission meeting so that the commission may consider the proposed order and adopt with modifications at the next regularly scheduled commission meeting.
Hey, Mr. Tremaine?
We concur.
Okay, excellent. Mr. Rankin, if you don't mind doing that would be great. Did you want the commission to hear it at the April 7th at the beginning of that, or because then there is no other April ones, it would go out to May. So it depends. I want to just make sure we solidify that.
Yeah, I know, I guess.
And you're in the April 7th one as well.
I am.
So.
There's a lot going on between now and then.
No stress.
Yeah, I wonder, there is a second week in April.
I'm happy to tack it on to the second week as well if you want the beginning of the second week.
And
of
I'm
April.
sure Northwind wouldn't mind to have an order sooner than later. And so if possible, just to give a little bit of breathing room, if we would be authorized or permitted to submit a draft proposed order in advance for consideration during one of the mornings of the April 21st week of the commission's meeting. That would be ideal.
Mr. Tremaine?
No objection.
So let's do it for that Monday, the 21st. We can start it off. We'll consider this one right off the bat.
I appreciate the consideration.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
I realize you have a lot on your plate right at the moment. So if there's nothing else for this particular case, Mr. Tremaine, you had the finger on the button, so I'm just looking.
Nothing else.
Okay, Mr. Rankin?
Appreciate the commission's attention and engagement in this case and consideration of the application, and we look forward to getting you guys a draft proposed order.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so we're done with that part of this meeting. There's no, Mr. Chandler, is there any pending litigation right at the moment?
No.
Okay. There's no other business. Our next meeting is April the 7th through the 11th of 2025. So if there's nothing else to bring up, this meeting is adjourned for today. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate it. Have a good rest of the day. And those on the platform, we thank you as well.